Tuesday, September 22nd. Linear pair angles. We know that linear pair angles always add together to equal 180 degrees. So you're going to take the two expressions, add them together, and set them equal to 180 degrees. So combine my two expressions, 7x plus 20 plus 5x plus 10. I get 12x plus 30 equals 180 degrees. And then you can work through that problem. Okay, let's go back over conditional statements again. Remember, a conditional statement is something written in if-then form. A converse statement is the conditional statement, but the hypothesis and the conclusion are flipped. The inverse statement is the conditional statement, but you add the word not. The contrapositive is the inverse statement, but just flipped. And we can write a biconditional if the conditional and the converse are both true. Okay, so linear pairs have a sum of 180 degrees. So if the angles are a linear pair, then their sum is 180 degrees. That's the conditional statement. We take the first part, turn it into the hypothesis, take the second part, turn it into the conclusion. So if the angles are a linear pair, then their sum is 180 degrees. Is this a true statement? Of course it is. Okay, the converse, we just take the condition, we just take the hypothesis and the conclusion. We take those two things and we flip them. So if their sum is 180 degrees, then the angles are a linear pair. So this one's a little bit harder because if they add up to be 180 degrees, they could be a linear pair. But not all angles that add up to 180 degrees are a linear pair because linear pairs have to be adjacent. So this statement is false. And the reason why this statement is false, if we wanted to add an image, let's go and search the web and see what we can find. Supplementary, let's see what they have for supplementary angles on here. Let's see what this first image is. Okay, this is a great image because these two angles are not making a linear pair right now because they're not adjacent. They don't share a side. But these two angles do add up to be 180 degrees. So these are non-adjacent supplementary angles. So here's your counterexample. Okay, the inverse statement is the conditional statement, but we add the word not. That's what that tilde means. So we can take the original statement up here. If the angles are a linear pair, then their sum is 180 degrees. And we can say if the angles are not a linear pair, then their sum is not 180 degrees. Well, if you remember yesterday, we talked about how the inverse and the converse, they have to have the same truth value. So the deal is, since the converse was false, the inverse is also going to be false. The reason is because it says if they're not a linear pair, so we have two angles that are not a linear pair, it's saying that their sum cannot be 180 degrees. And that's a lie because if we take this picture that we just looked at, those are not a linear pair, right? But they prove the conclusion false. They add up to be 180. Okay, the contrapositive is just the converse statement, but we add the word not into the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if their sum is not 180 degrees, then the angles are not a linear pair. It's also a true statement. Okay, the conditional and the converse are not both true, so we cannot write a biconditional statement. You try the next two. Check your answers with what I have. If the angles are a linear pair, then they are adjacent. So are all linear pairs adjacent? That is true. If you have a pair of adjacent angles, are they going to be linear? That would be false. Let's go look up a picture. Let's insert an image from, let's search the web. Let's look for adjacent. Okay. So this is a good picture here. Do you agree that these angles are adjacent, but they do not form a linear pair? So this is a good counterexample here. If they are not a linear pair, then they cannot be adjacent. Well, that's false because these are adjacent, but they're not a linear pair. And if they're not adjacent, then they do not form a linear pair. Well, all linear pairs have to be adjacent, so if they're not adjacent, they cannot be a linear pair. That's true. We cannot write a biconditional because the conditional and the converse are not true. And if you look, this still follows the same thing where the converse and inverse have the same truth value. The conditional and the contrapositive also have the same truth value. Okay, so if angles are complementary, then they have a sum of 90 degrees. That's true. If two angles have a sum of 90 degrees, then they're complementary. That's true. If the angles are not complementary, then they can't add up to be 90 degrees. That's true. If they do not have a sum of 90 degrees, then they are not complementary. That's also true. So all your truth values are true. We can write it biconditional. So we take the hypothesis, which is everything that comes after if. We write that first, then we take the conclusion, which is everything that comes after then. We write that second. So we're going to write the angles are complementary. If and only if they have a sum of 90 degrees. And of course, that's going to be a true statement.